Hi everyone, and welcome to what is going to be Battlechat number 9. And I'm your host Henry Hyde, and today I'm delighted to welcome again onto the show the veteran wargamer, none other than Mr. Jay Arnold, who's over the water in the United States. Hi there, Jay.
Hello. How are you today, Henry? I'm
fine, Jay. I've had a bit more rest this morning than I was expecting because we got our time zones mixed up. So I was sitting here next to my machine waiting for Jay to turn up, but he'd moved across a time zone into another state, and so I don't know. He was probably snoring at the time. Anyway, we've managed to get together now, and I'm really glad that Jay's agreed to come back on, because obviously we had a recording, I don't know, I suppose it was about a month ago, month and a half, something like that, where I had Jay on the show, but we talked about kind of more serious matters about his life as a soldier and that kind of stuff, and we got a lot of great feedback actually about that show. Mm-hmm. For which I know that I and Jay are both very grateful. But also I wanted to, the fact is that Jay's a fun guy and he's a wargamer, and so I wanted to get him on today just to talk about the gaming stuff, the fun stuff. So here we are, Jay. So let's kick off. I mean, obviously you run your own Veteran Wargamer podcast, Jay. And
yes.
How many episodes have you now done of that, Jay?
44.
44! Wow.
44, if you can believe it. And it is very much a fly by the seat of my pants operation, because I don't have 45 planned yet.
I know exactly what you mean. Well, that's pretty impressive, 44. I mean, obviously, we're not quite at Neil Shuck standards. I mean, you probably listened to the podcast I did with Neil last week, celebrating 250 episodes of the Meeples and Miniatures podcast, which is pretty stunning. But as the man just about to do, this is my 9th Battlechat, my 11th podcast kind of overall in this series, what with the Q&A chats and stuff. 44 that's pretty out there as far as I'm concerned. That's blooming impressive. But the fact of the matter is, I want to talk to you today about your gaming stuff. So first of all, Jay, I mean, the thing I didn't actually put on our show notes, which was the most obvious one, is tell us something about how you actually got started as a wargamer in the first place. How did that come about, Jay?
Well, that's interesting enough to answer. I would say I was probably 9 or 10. My parents had divorced when I was 6.
Right.
And we were living in San Antonio, Texas. My mom moved up to Kansas City for some reason. I think at the time, my Aunt Mary, who just passed, God rest her soul, she was living in Kansas City also with her family, and I think my mom wanted to get out of Texas but still wanted to be rooted or have roots already in place, and I think that's why she moved to Kansas City. But anyway, we would go visit for the summer, and my mom was living in a place that was within walking distance of a game store by the name of Yankee Doodle.
Oh, great name.
Yeah, Yankee Doodle was owned by a guy named Scott Newberry, and we would go in there and take a look. And my brother must have spent longer with her during the summer than I did, because he'd already had it scoped out.
Right.
And somehow we got a little bit of pocket money to go up there, and he purchased one of the first gaming items that he bought was, of course, where pretty much everybody else of my generation got their start, Redbox D&D.
Right.
He got Redbox D&D. I got a box of pre-painted orcs. Mm-hmm. And they're orcs or kobolds or something. But remembering back, they can't be more than about 20 millimeters tall. So I don't know if they were 25 millimeter kobolds or 15 millimeter black orcs or what they were, but they had I just remember there was a mix of them, and they're all basically the same casting, but with different weapons. So one had a sword, another one had a mace, another one had a spear, and then they all had kind of a spangle helm type helmet.
Yep.
And a shield and different colored tunics. So there was a green one and a purple one and a red one. Kind of a precursor to the Ninja Turtles, probably.
Gotcha.
And and these big, huge, yellow, toothy grins. They're just I just wish I could find those figures, and because it just has so much charm about them, and they looked really friendly and ready to bash your head in.
Great.
But anyway, so we dabbled with that a little bit, and then later he picked up the fastest Star Trek tactical starship combat simulator, or whatever the full name was. And we had a lot of fun with that. Mm-hmm. At some point, he got the game Axis and Allies. Yeah. And that was really our first real war game. And then I think that same time frame, we got a game called Scotland Yard.
Oh, okay.
Which is kind of an asymmetric game where most of the players are playing Scotland Yard detectives, but there's one player who is a criminal mastermind, and you're chasing through London, and you use the underground and taxi stops and whatnot to capture the criminal. And what we did was we took the combat mechanisms from Axis and Allies and applied them to the Scotland Yard board, and we did some. Before we knew there was an Operation Sea Lion, we were playing Operation Sea Lion in the streets of London.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So, and cool. you could use anti-aircraft guns as anti-tank guns, of course.
Brilliant. So after that, I mean, you ever part of a gaming club, Jay?
Yeah, later on, actually after when I was on active duty at Fort Bragg, I just gamed at a store, right, mostly. And then when I got back and moved back to Kansas City, I was part of I joined a club. I started, or I got in touch with a guy while I was in Bosnia, actually. Oh, right. This was the early days of TMP. Mm-hmm. And I connected with him over Stargrunt, actually.
Oh, right.
And when I got back to Kansas City, we met up and quite liked playing games together in his basement. And his name's John Isbrand, and I still keep in touch with him from time to time. But right. Actually, the majority of my core gaming group that I game with now still games with John.
Right.
But my J3 crew. My first miniatures game, even though my brother did at some point get miniatures for the FASA game, it is a hex and counter tactical game. First miniatures game, though, Christmas in 1988, my folks picked up Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader.
Yep.
And the original Beaky Marines, the plastics.
Gotcha.
The metal Space Orc Raiders, and a bunch of Pirates and Adventurers.
Oh, right.
And so that's, and I keep going back to that well, as I'm sure folks that follow the Veteran Wargamer on Twitter and Facebook will see, because I just bought the Kill Team box set.
Gotcha.
So I keep going back to that well, and every once in a while I'll say, I'm done with this, and then
of course
here I come.
It's interesting because that Rogue Trader name, which I know was kind of the first iteration of Warhammer 40k, wasn't it, by Rick Priestley? Mm-hmm. That was also the name of a computer game back when I first started using Apple Mac. So this would have been about 1991, 92. And I had a little Mac Classic or SE, I think it was Mac SE, with a tiny 10-inch black and white screen. And there weren't many computer games back then for anything, let alone for the Mac. But Rogue Trader was the first one where it was, exploring star systems and trading and doing deals. And then in between your planetary systems, there was the chance of actual space combat. But this was all kind of black and white line space combat back in those days. But it was a fantastic game. But yeah, that name Rogue Trader, I mean, I know for a certain generation of miniatures gamers, the first thing they think of is, oh yes, Games Workshop, Citadel Miniatures and that kind of stuff. Whereas for me, it's like, oh yes, there was that computer game. But anyway, the thing is, this leads us on slightly neatly, Jay, because I wanted to discuss what your favourite periods or genres were in gaming. And I noticed the first thing that you sort of kind of put up in the show notes actually is sci-fi. That's obviously kind of one of your first loves and one of the things that you've really stuck with. Do you want to talk about that, Jay?
Yeah, and the thing is, I'm not one of these people who, how do I want to put it? I like space opera, of course. I love Star Wars. I love Warhammer 40,000, which is... I've got a love-hate relationship with the Warhammer 40,000 universe, to be honest with you, but we can talk about that more later. But I like hard sci-fi also. I like the Traveler background. I like Star Grunt / Full Thrust / Dirt Side. Hammers, slammers, the gritty, realistic aliens, of course. I mean, who doesn't like aliens that's listening to this podcast at the moment? So I like that gritty realism of our own military experience projected forward.
Gotcha.
And within reason, I was having a discussion on my on a private Facebook group about just how silly some of the things are that we deal with in our games, in our sci-fi games, like walkers, you're not going to see walkers that are 30, 40 feet tall. You're just not. I mean, it's too big of a target, there's ground pressure issues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know what? At the end of the day, a big stompy robot's just a hell of a lot of fun. So at some point you got to suspend your disbelief because let's face it. I mean, most of the stuff that we play with, as sci-fi gamers is unrealistic anyway.
Of course.
When you think about it, I mean, without some type of panacea in energy and propulsion systems, we're not going to have spaceborne militaries to speak of anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
At least not the type that we play with.
Yep.
But anyhow, sci-fi. I love sci-fi. There's that, for some reason, there's a fandom break between Star Trek and Star Wars. I love them both for different reasons. Oh,
I know. You see some of the online arguments on Twitter and stuff, and to me it's just like, hey, calm down.
Yeah.
Really. I don't. It's one of those things where, I think if you watch a movie like Star Wars or Star Trek or anything else, whatever, you have your preferences, but there's no need to go around kind of dissing the other side, which after all is a piece of writing. It's a creation, it's entertainment. But I think a lot of genre stuff does attract, how can we put it politely, fervent support.
Yeah.
And polarized fervent support as well, which is all a bit of a shame, really. But yeah, so that's cool. But so I agree with you completely, actually, what you were saying about some of the notions like the big walkers in Star Wars and stuff. I mean, they look fantastic. They're amazing kind of conceptually, but as you say, utter nonsense militarily. It's just ludicrously vulnerable. Put something up on giant walking stilts is just, hello? I don't think you'd do that. Nice target. Which is interesting, of course, because you really are a soldier. So, I mean, this obviously informs, to a certain extent, how you feel about some of the stuff you're presented with in games, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and you know, you look at some of the designs for sci-fi vehicles and whatnot, and you just look at some of the odd angles that they put stuff at.
Yeah.
Okay, bullet trap. Oh,
absolutely.
Huge flat side. Oh, that's gonna. That's just asking for a missile.
Absolutely. I mean, interesting. In amongst that, you mentioned the Hammer Slammer stuff, which, of course, Miniature Wargames editor John Treadaway will be over the moon to hear that. And I've actually had a game of Hammer Slammer, so I can sort of relate to what you're saying there. I actually found it more interesting than I thought I was going to, I have to say. And actually, that the kind of design of some of the vehicles and stuff, which there's an awful lot of sort of hover vehicles and that kind of thing, aren't there? Was something that I found really quite interesting and actually reasonably plausible. But of course, that was written by what's his name, David Drake, isn't it? Who actually served in Vietnam, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Yeah, he was an intelligence officer with, I think, the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment.
Right.
And speaking of hammer slammers, that stuff, it's one of those things where it's one of my not really a wish list so much, but it is something I want to do. There's one of his stories in particular it's one of the longer stories. In one of the stories, it talks about the slammers going up against, basically as an auxiliary force to an existing military.
Yeah.
And they're deployed as a joint force, and they're going up against this other military. And the way he talks about, and he actually describes it as like a company or even, a demi-battalion operation.
Yeah.
And he talks about these wheeled personnel carriers going up over the dikes in a rice paddy and that sort of thing. You can definitely tell that it was probably inspired by an actual event or a pastiche of different events.
Yeah.
And it's something I would love to do in Pico armor. Odzial Osmi.
Right, yeah.
Makes Sci-Fi models, and they have blowers, and they've got wheeled and tracked Sci-Fi stuff.
All right.
And I would love to do something like that.
Cool.
And I'm not sure what rules I'd use just yet. Probably dirt side, because I do love John Tuffley's rules.
Right.
But anyway, a little bit of a slight digression there, but just
that's all right.
Yeah, you can get blowers and everything from 28 all the way down to 3 mil, so they're out there.
Yeah, it's surprisingly kind of popular. I mean, I think it's quite surprising, particularly for historical gamers, when you get a glimpse into kind of sci-fi and fantasy gaming, how comparatively popular some of this stuff is. So and as I say, John will be delighted with that. The other thing that I kind of noticed there was that, as well as sci-fi, of course, you're interested in World War II gaming. So is that something you've always been interested in, or a relative development for you?
As far as gaming is concerned, it's relatively recent. I mean, if we're splitting hairs, I've been miniatures gaming for 30 years, and World War II is always something that's interested me, but it's never something I've done until recently. And we have Big Dick Clark and and Nick Skinner to really thank for that. Between Chain of Command and What a Tanker, that's really gotten me going with World War II stuff. Those are really spectacular rules to play games with.
Yeah.
And they're really, up until now, there really hadn't been something that really fit the bill for me, because they were either the World War II rules that had been available up until Chain of Command and What a Tanker, for me at least, were either too fiddly.
Yeah.
Or they were too simplified.
Gotcha.
For lack of a better term.
Yeah.
and didn't really get across the feeling that I wanted to get. Now, another project that I've done independently is I put together a Battle of Britain game using the X-Wing rules, the X-Wing miniature rules.
All right.
And 3mm Pico armor aircraft.
Yeah.
And I've run that at my J3 game weekend, and also my brother's CJ3 weekend.
Right.
And that's just a hell of a lot of fun.
Oh, right.
And it wasn't just a lot of fun to play; it was a lot of fun to put together because I was taking, I was taking the time to research different pilots and give them abilities based on their actual historical performance and and that sort of thing. So like Sir Douglas Baden, the
Douglas Bader.
Douglas Bader.
Yep.
The what squadron was he? I forget, but anyway, he had 2 prosthetic legs.
Yeah. I know.
So
an amazing man.
So he had a lot more. So for example, he had a lot more, blood in his body, relatively speaking, and didn't suffer the effects of pulling G's as badly as other pilots.
Yeah, yeah.
So his special ability is he's able to pull off multiple high stress maneuvers in a row without having to recover.
Yeah.
And it's that type of thing that when you can apply real life situations to a game and you figure out how to do that, that's really a lot of fun to do.
Oh, absolutely.
As a game designer or scenario writer, however you want to put it.
Yeah, yeah.
It was a really fulfilling project because have you played the X-Wing miniatures game?
I haven't, no. But I mean, it's not that dissimilar from kind of Wings of Glory and stuff, isn't it?
No. But one of the neat things that they did with it is you can have named pilots with special abilities, and you can just have your squadron pilots, and there might be like a squadron special ability. But I really took the time to figure out what squadrons were flying during the Battle of Britain and apply those squadron names and get the squadron badge on the cards and
great,
get actual photos of the named pilots. So for example, JG2, my pilot for JG2 is Adolf Galland, because how are you going to have a how are you going to have a Battle of Britain game without Adolf Galland,
Cool. We should point out to listeners who don't know what JG stands for. It's Jagdgeschwader.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a fighter squadron.
Yep.
So, and, I did ME-109s for it, ME-110s, and BF-111s. Or HE-111s, excuse me.
Gotcha.
And so the Germans have a nice mix of aircraft, and, of course, you've got Spitfires, because you can't do Battle of Britain without Spitfires, but you can't do Battle of Britain without Hurricanes either.
Absolutely. In fact, actually, the Hurricane is my favorite aircraft. I've always
and I can see why.
Hurricanes. Yeah, love it.
I can see why.
Good old sturdy wooden thing. Love it. So your World War II interest extends into aerial wargaming as well as the kind of ground-based wargaming. Mm-hmm. When it comes to, I mean, obviously you've mentioned that Lardy's games there, Chain of Command and What a Tanker. So what is it specifically that kind of turns you on to those rule sets? We're going to talk about other rule sets a bit later, but is there anything specific, you could just briefly say that, are they particularly, is it just the balance between realism and playability with those rule sets? Is it the fun factor? What is it particularly that really turns you on to those?
They have a knack of taking what are basically simple mechanisms and applying them in a way that give not just plausible results, but also results that, how do I want to put this? When you put them together, they just make sense, and they're not overly complex. They're not overly complicated.
Yeah.
They are, as we've discussed on my show before, they are results oriented. They are not process oriented.
Yeah.
but at the same time, they're focused on the decisions that have to be made, not how those decisions are carried out.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that, because there are a lot of games out there, and I've said this before, that confuse complexity with realism. They confuse detail with realism.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the commander on the field, the leader on the field of whatever level, isn't concerned with the minutia. He's got people to do the minutia for him. He's thinking about the big picture, and the Lardy rules allow you to look at the big picture and deal with those things. And you know what? They designed 2 levels down. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
That's how we plan. We plan 2 levels down.
Yeah. I remember us talking about that when we did our last interview about the how many levels above or below, you know, where you're at. You should be planning.
Yeah, you plan 1 level down, but you're aware 2 levels down.
Yeah.
And they just do it right. And they talk themselves about how, you know, a lot of their games use similar mechanisms with some small tweaks, and it gets them into trouble because they forget exactly which tweaks they apply to which rule set. And so they might be playing Chain of Command, but using shock the way it's done in Sharp Practice. And, you know, whoever is playing with them has to remind them how their rules are actually written. But and they're heck of, you know, they're really nice guys too. So.
Absolutely. I mean, because I've got Water Tanker. I haven't actually played it yet, but
you have to.
I'm behind the curve because I go on Twitter and everyone's playing Water Tanker. I mean, like every other post on Twitter at the moment is someone who's just painted up another shed load of tanks for Water Tanker. It's extraordinary how it's taken off, and you feel it's kind of deserving of that kind of popularity.
Oh, I definitely think it's deserved of that type of popularity. There are other companies that are doing single tank games. I just simply don't know enough about those games to comment. But man, What a Tanker really does it for me.
Gotcha.
And you got to get yourself in the mindset of, okay, well, you know, sometimes the dice don't go the way you want them to, and you know what? Murphy is always there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Murphy's always there, and things aren't going to go the way you want them to every time, and sometimes you just have to deal with it. That has resulted in some ahistorical decisions being made, but I do think, you know, it during gameplay. But I do think that they've talked about putting infantry and anti-tank guns in it. And I think if they do it right, that's going to get people thinking the right way about, you know, charging across the entire table in one go just to see if they can do it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe infantry will be more of, you know, one of those things where it's, you know, yeah, I can race across the town, but wait, hold on a second.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's someone
infantry with Molotov cocktails and satchel charges hang out in towns, and
absolutely. Now, so at the other end of the scale, from your sci-fi and World War II, of course, you're a man with a background in ancient history, Jay.
Yes, I am.
So I imagine that ancients form a core part of your interest in the hobby.
Oh, absolutely. And you could argue that I've got more ancients figures painted than anything else.
Oh, right.
Because I've got a good collection of 6 mil. Rome. I guess they're late Republican. Well, they're Punic War, actually, so that wouldn't be late Republican at all, would it? So, yeah, Punic War, Romans painted up. I've got Carthaginians to fight them and Celts of various stripe, whether you want to call them Celto-Iberians or Gallic Celts. You know, at that scale, it doesn't make much of a difference. As long as someone is wearing some NAF red pants, we'll be all right, right? Yeah, I have to thank a buddy of mine, Jake Rose, because he bequeathed those to me. He he's married to an Army colonel, and she, of course, moves on a regular basis. And so one day he decided I gotta lighten the load. So I ended up with not a small collection of 6mm ancients out of it. So, and I've got some what I call Hollywood Romans, early Imperial Roman, the classic rectangular scutum with the lorica segmentata and the
lobster tail
crested helmets, all that. So I've got some of those also, and you know what? Sometimes they end up on the table together, and no one has complained yet. So
when you play with your ancients, Jay, what are you playing? You're playing Commands and Colors, or are you playing DBA, DBM? What are you doing?
Commands and Colors, and then there might have been some games using a certain rule set called Blood and Thunder that you might be familiar with.
Oh, I couldn't possibly comment about that, Jay. That would be foolish, wouldn't it?
So I'm still waiting on my answers to my rules questions on those, Henry.
Yeah. Like I said, I couldn't possibly comment at the moment. The main thing is I don't want to get people's hopes up too much. Oh, are they in development? Well, yeah, they've sort of been they were in development when I was first writing the Wargaming Compendium, and the set of rules in there was going to be this Blood and Thunder Ancients rule set. And as I've discussed with you, Jay, it just became apparent that, oh my God, there's just so many variables and permutations when it comes to the combat and stuff that I could see that it was going to take a good, an additional kind of year of development and play testing. And my very patient editor at Pen and Sword he said, no, I can't give you that much time, Henry, to do something else. So that's why it ended up being an 18th century horse and musket set in the compendium. But yes, Jay was one of the very few shall I say honoured? No, he wasn't honoured. He was one of the very few fools who agreed to take the kind of was sort of it was alpha, beta. What's next? Gamma? Is it the Gamma set? Was sort of a late beta set of the Blood and Thunder rules to kind of have a bit of a play with interesting results. I think that would be fair to say, Jay. Wouldn't it be interesting? Because you were interested in doing sort of a fantasy development of them as well, weren't you?
Possibly, yeah. And that's actually I've kind of moved on from that because what I'm wanting to do with fantasy is, well, we'll talk about that in a second, but let's keep talking about ancients because I do love the ancient period.
Do crack on with your ancients, mate. So tell us more about your passion for that. Yeah,
my degree is in classics, so Greek and Roman literature and history. My primary focus was on Roman literature. Right. I took 3 years of Latin. Unfortunately, the faculty where I attended were not huge into military history.
Right. So where did you take your degree, Jay?
Southern Illinois University at Carbondale.
Okay.
And I met my dear sweet wife there, and we've been married 15 years now. And
wow, congratulations.
Thank you. I actually ended up doing my senior level, not quite thesis, but my senior level advanced work on the Oresteia,
right,
by Aeschylus.
Okay,
and which is interesting considering I didn't take a lick of Greek, so it was all in translation, and to my detriment. But that play's got, or that trilogy's got it all, man. That's a great trilogy.
Right.
Infanticide, regicide, matricide.
All the sides.
It's got it on all sides. So, it's just a whole lot of fun. Not much military talk in it, but
yeah.
And it's a quick read also. You could probably, if you pick up the Oresteia, you could probably bang through it in an evening.
All right. Okay.
Takes a little bit more work to really get everything out of it, but
sure. I ought to go back and ask you why classics? I mean, what drew you to take a degree in classics, Jay?
Well, I started out as a history major, and I took a class on the Roman Republic. No, it was it's like History of the Ancient World or something like that.
Oh, right.
And the instructor, his name was Sean O'Brien with an M.
Right.
He was just so engaging and really made the period come alive, because it was the classical period he talked about. Started. It was just a real quick survey of basically the 6th, 7th, 6th century BC Greeks.
Yeah.
All the way up to basically the Principate.
Gotcha.
In Rome, and he really made it come alive. So I started taking more classes, and then I became a double major in classics and history, and then eventually I just dropped the history part and made it a minor. So I've got my degree is in classics with a minor in history, and
Gotcha.
my actual most of my history work was actually medieval.
Oh, right.
So I've got quite a bit of work. Luckily, there was a member of the history faculty who was into military history, especially naval history. So I was able to scratch that itch with him.
Right. Okay. So, because the interesting is with naval history, that's made me think of Jasper, who's the editor-in-chief at Wargame Soldier and Strategy, because I think he's still... Have you finished it yet, Jasper, if you're listening to this? He's partway through writing his PhD about the Roman Navy. I don't think he's actually got there yet, but... So you've obviously you do quite a lot of ancient stuff, and you've got your classics degree behind you, which is fantastic, because how many wargamers game a period have actually got a university degree on the subject that they game the most, which is interesting. But of course, then the other great thing about the ancients period, so is obviously the classical period, by the sound of things, is what appeals to you most, Jay, kind of Romans and Greeks and that kind of stuff, yeah?
Pretty much.
Right.
I'm just not a huge fan of the I don't want to say the Greeks, because I do like the Greeks. Alexander, I know there's a lot of people who think that Alexander and the successors were great fun to game and whatnot. And it just never really caught my eye. And the Persians and all that is... I guess it's at some point you just have to focus on one thing and just...
Of course you do. Because ancients is a vast era, for God's sake, isn't it? Anything from like 3000 BC up to kind of the WRG used to cut it off at 1485, didn't they? In their ancients rules. So yes, you do, and so if you just say Romans, that in itself, of course, is a huge chunk of history, from a couple of hundred years BC through to several hundred years AD, if you include Byzantium and everything that they got up to, of course. And I agree with you. I mean, there is a fascination with the Romans that I think we all have. I think it's also because, of course, it's probably that part of the ancient period that has seen most airtime cinematically as well, isn't it? I mean, there's a huge number of kind of movies, most of them of fairly epic proportions, covering the Romans. I mean, one of my favourite movies of all time, Gladiator. Wow, I mean, I just adored that movie. But of course, you go way back to things like Spartacus with Charlton Heston and the Julius Caesar, and Shakespeare liked a bit of Roman himself, didn't he? Bless him. So but also I was interested quite a few years ago now when Guy and I used to game Byzantines versus Arabs. So you're talking about 300, 400, 500, 600 AD, the kind of late Roman and Byzantine period, which is absolutely fascinating. So yes, I can understand that. The other thing is, of course, that if you've got an interest in ancients, it's not entirely surprising that can also inform your love of fantasy gaming. Although, of course, most fantasy gaming actually heads kind of into what would be later kind of Dark Ages and medievalish kind of era of history. So your fantasy gaming, I mean, already right at the start of the show, you mentioned those kind of kobolds or little orcs or whatever they were that you found.
Mm-hmm.
So, where did your interest in fantasy gaming take you? I mean, are you a Warhammer player, Jay?
Yeah, one time I had Warhammer Fantasy Battle. I actually had 3rd and 4th editions at one point. Actually, the most I did with 3rd edition was I got the Realm of Chaos books, and they had a neat. The Realm of Chaos books had a neat kind of warband skirmish system where you would roll up a champion and his followers, and you'd fight with them, and I had a lot of fun doing that.
Right.
Then I did Demon World when it came out, at least when it came to the United States, when a German company called Hobby Products had it, and they had some really spectacular 15 mil or 18 mil figures.
Right.
Mordheim, when it came out, we were big fans of Mordheim.
Oh, okay.
Another warband game. My reckoning of fantasy is very much rooted in the Warhammer old world, and there's been some other stuff that's come and gone. Had a lot of fun with Chronopia when it came out, and that was an interesting background because I don't think that they never really put any faction forward as the quote unquote good guys.
Right.
And there's an argument to be made that the orcs and goblins and ogres, which they collectively called Black Bloods, were arguably the good guys, or at least the best of the bad guys.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Just in how their society actually ran.
All right.
But Chronopia got a bum deal, I think. The company that made them I believe they're a Swedish company called Target Games.
Right.
And they also did Warzone and the Mutant Chronicles role-playing game. And they brought out first edition Warzone was a pretty neat little system. Some of the miniatures were a bit goofy, but we had a lot of fun with the game. And when second edition came out, it seems like they changed a lot of things that didn't need changing.
Right.
And it made it a worse game.
Oh, okay.
And there were a lot of people who felt that way. And the thing is, I think they tried to be a 40K killer and came out with a box set with a bunch of plastic miniatures in it.
Uh-huh.
And I'm not sure exactly how the business end of that went, but...
Right. Yeah. Anyone who tries to be a 40K killer, they're onto a hiding to nothing, probably.
Yeah. They didn't do so well with it, and, the proof's in the pudding now, because you can get those plastic figures for, pennies on eBay, just about.
Right.
And, unfortunately it killed the company, and Chronopia went with it. I think Prince August either bought the molds or bought...
Oh, okay.
Prince August in Ireland either bought the molds or bought the remaining stock, because they're still selling the Chronopia and Warzone figures. And it's one of those things where one of these days I'll take a look, because their orcs, the Black Bloods, the goblins, the orcs, the ogres, they had a kind of a Saracen medieval Arab look to them.
Oh, right. That's interesting.
And really, really neat looking figures. The goblins get a little goofy because they introduced a faction called the Swamp Goblins, and they, ride giant mosquitoes and and that sort of thing. But
okay,
they were really neat figures, and I'd like to maybe get back to that. But see, what was it? The other fan? Oh yeah, Clan War. Oh, okay. Clan War was so good. It was East Asian fantasy.
Oh, right.
Basically take your Sengoku period samurai and Ashigaru and all the rest, and throw all the demons and Oni and temple dogs and all that stuff on top.
Oh, wow, okay.
And it was a fun game to play.
Right.
The miniatures were spectacular.
Really?
Kev Adams did their goblins, and they had so much charm and humor to them because the goblins were 2 to a base.
Oh, all right.
So some of the goblins, there'd be one swinging another by the feet, and the one being swung had a giant sword in his hands.
Fantastic.
Yeah, they were so great. And there's someone in Britain that has all of the Clan War figures that I purchased at one point because I thought, oh man, I'm never going to do anything with these, and I sold them off. And which is unfortunate to say the least, because the goblins were great, the undead were fantastic. Who doesn't like an undead samurai, for crying out loud?
Fantastic.
I guess there could be someone who doesn't like samurai warfare for some reason, and that person needs to have their head examined. But it's just really great stuff. And
it's
here
funny.
we are.
It's funny because samurai warfare is something I love. I think I mentioned this with Neil Shuck the other day. Because I studied Kendo and Iaido myself, actual martial arts, and I love the samurai look and everything. I've never actually done any samurai gaming.
Mm-hmm.
How weird is that? It's just one of those things. I've not been, but then as with everything, Jay, if you're not around other people who are interested in doing that kind of thing, you're not inclined to do it yourself. I seem to remember many, oh gosh, it is, I'll add another many to that, years ago, back in the late 70s, early 1980s, when my chum Guy and I were first getting to know each other, Dixon Miniatures came out with their range of samurai. Mm-hmm. And we went to a show which might have been the Colours Show. Oh my God, it might have been the Colours Show when it was held at the Hexagon in Reading. Now, there's going to be some of our listeners who are going, oh my God, I remember that. It was like a pit of doom, this incredibly dark environment. I think it was the same environment where they used to host the snooker world championships and stuff. Which was,
that's a bad miss.
Well, there you go. But anyway, we stumbled upon the Dixon stand when they were just promoting their new range of samurai, and we literally bought a handful of them. I may still even have them somewhere. I'll have to dig them out. And certainly for the time, they were some of the most detailed and elegantly sculpted miniatures around. I mean, they were very nicely proportioned, very nicely sculpted. Funnily enough, another strange little connection which I'll just bring in here. Trevor Ridley, who was the owner of Atlantic Publishers, which briefly, of course, owned Battlegames and then Miniature Wargames with Battlegames. He himself had been a wargamer back in the 70s and 80s. He'd even gone into competitions and stuff. And he, when you stepped into his hallway in Thorpe Bay in Essex, right inside his hallway, he had a glass cabinet with his collection of samurai miniatures in there. All very beautifully painted and everything. And they were all these Dixon Miniatures range from way back then. So that's interesting you talking about the samurai stuff and clan wars, Jay, because as I say, it's something that's always visually appealed to me, but I've never actually gamed. Whereas I know that, for example, our fellow podcasting pal Neil Shuck is hugely into samurai, and in fact he's been painting a load in recent months, hasn't he?
Yeah.
So,
and Peter Berry's got a nice range of 6mm also.
Yeah, absolutely, he has.
Now I have read a rumor. I'm not sure how true this is, but I have read a rumor that Richard Borg is revisiting Sengoku period for a standalone game, possibly for GMT. There was a Zvezda, did that box set that had the samurai battles. Commands and Colors and their own Art of Tactic, and I've got a write-up on the Commands and Colors version on my old blog.
Right.
Fun game. I'd really love to see what GMT would do with it, because I would get that in a heartbeat, because we played one or two scenarios and it was a lot of fun. It's just those damn Zvezda multi-part 1/72 scale plastics.
Yeah.
Why? Beautiful figures, way too fiddly.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
But anyway,
Now that's
fantasy.
interesting. Yeah, because there's also kind of mentioning Richard Borg there. I ought to mention, because you're interested in sci-fi, of course. He's just done the Red Alert thing with Plastic Soldier Company.
I eagerly await my box.
Oh, you did? You backed the Kickstarter on that?
Oh, I did.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah. I thought you might have done, Jay.
Between spaceships and Commands and Colors, what's not to like? And you can make the argument. I think you can make the argument that the Commands and Colors system will work for space warfare because of the difficulties in communication over vast distances of space.
Yeah.
So like a modern and I've thought about, like a modern or sci-fi ground Commands and Colors might not work because of how communications work now and will probably work in the future.
Yeah.
But in space, that might actually work out. So anyone who's spent more than about 20 minutes with you or me talking gaming has heard Commands and Colors many, many times. So
right.
I think it's definitely worth discussing some of my other favorite games as we segue ham-handedly into the stage of the show notes.
Let's crash into the next part of the show there, where, yes, I want to find out. I mean, you already mentioned, obviously, some of your favorite rule sets, and we've mentioned the Lardies and that kind of stuff, but because of your interest, and it's interesting to me because we're kind of moving into territory that's not my home terrain by any stretch of the imagination, because you have got this kind of deep and abiding interest in sci-fi gaming and stuff, whereas almost all my sci-fi gaming, just to let people know, I was computer games. I mean, Sims of one kind or another back in the day when I used to spend far too much time glued to my Mac screen, lost in space or whatever, whereas on the actual tabletop wargaming front or board gaming front, I've done very little sci-fi gaming. I own quite a lot of sci-fi rule sets, actually, but actually the only sci-fi gaming I've done on the tabletop was with John Treadaway, and I noticed there's another rule set you're about to kind of mention, which is Full Thrust, which has been around a long time, hasn't it? Full Thrust.
It has, yeah.
And I had a game with John Treadaway, and I did come away thinking, oh, do you know what? That's a really clever rule set. I like that.
It is.
For kind of space combat and stuff. So go on, Jay. You tell us about your love of some of these sci-fi rule sets.
Well, the two of my top favorite games are Stargrunt and Full Thrust, both written by John Tuffley of Ground Zero Games. Just to give you an idea of the fan base or community for Full Thrust, there are no fewer than 2, maybe even 3 different groups that are continually pushing forward with the rules.
Oh, wow.
And I think they've actually got John's blessing. See, Full Thrust 2, which is, well, how do I want to put this? Full Thrust 2 came out, I want to say, in like 1994 or 5.
Yeah.
And then he came out with kind of an update called More Thrust. And then there were some other updates in what are called the Fleet books. There's 2 Fleet books.
Okay.
Now, the great thing about GZG Games is John has stopped producing the hard copies.
Right.
So he has put the PDFs on the GZG website for anyone to download.
Right, and I think that's where I got my set of the rules. Free to download.
Now, the thing is, the changes between More Thrust and the Fleet books are so significant that it's almost a new set of rules. It's almost a separate set of rules. You could make the argument that with the Fleet books, it becomes Full Thrust 3 because there are some pretty significant changes. So there are groups that have... But the thing is, you can't use the Fleet books by themselves. You still have to have the original book.
Oh, I see.
because it's not, the fleet books are not a complete rule set in themselves. It's, okay, here's what you're going to bolt on to to the old rules.
Right.
And you're going to scrap this part. And there are groups out there that have taken the full thrust, more thrust, and the 2 fleet books and put them together in a way, copied and pasted and edited and reshaped and reformed and slapped a fresh coat of paint on them to the point where, okay, this is the full version of full thrust.
Right.
Well, John also has, I forget exactly what company did it, but he's got a box set now, a full thrust box set, which has the updated version of the rules with 2 starter fleets.
Oh, right.
And it's not a lot of money. And full thrust is just a great system because you can do everything from a, single ship duels between 2 players to, I've easily run games in a convention setting with 9 or 10 ships per side.
Right. Okay.
One of my gaming outlets when I was in Afghanistan was I just banged out a full thrust scenario and all the ships for it while I was in Afghanistan. And then when I came home, I got the miniatures and painted them up and actually have laminated sheets where one side's the ship displays for the players to track all the damage and how fast they're going and where they're going and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And the other side, John has a light version of full thrust called Full Thrust Light, which works out to FTL, faster than light, which is, I think that's pretty clever.
Yeah.
Intentionally or otherwise. The new version of Full Thrust Light is like a 10-page booklet, but the original Full Thrust Light was just 2 pages.
Oh, all right.
So you shrink it down, you've got it book style on one side, and you've got the ship's displays on the other, and it's a Star Trek scenario. It's original series Star Trek, so
James T. Kirk and all that.
Oh yes, you can play James T. Kirk, commander of the Starship Enterprise.
Right.
And I've got his picture on the sheet that has the Enterprise, and I forget the other ship that I've got on that as part of that little squadron, but yeah, it's a 6-player game. There's 3 Klingon players and there's 3 Federation players. Each player is playing the role of a named character from the original series.
Oh, cool.
And that's also on my old blog.
Yeah.
Actually, that's on my old blog.
Right. Yeah. You and your old blogs, mate.
But no, that's on the Jay's Game Bunker blog that I started. Actually, when I was in Afghanistan, I started that.
All right.
But anyway, Star Trek's great. I mean, it's just a lot of fun. I'm definitely a fan of the original series more than the more modern stuff. I just love I like the clean look of the ships.
Right.
And
that very 1960s kind of look.
Oh yeah, it's spectacular. Have a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, yeah. Because you've also mentioned Star Grunt in your again a set I've heard of, but I've never actually played. Also
free from GZG. Works at 15, 25, 28, whatever size figures you want to use.
Right.
You're basically a platoon commander, platoon leader, whatever terminology you want to use.
Yeah.
And you've got your 3 to 4 squads with a couple of supports, and it just works really well. The really interesting part about it is the morale system. Mm-hmm. Up until Star Grunt, it seems like most games, morale status was either, hey, let's go kill everybody, to let's run away. And that was it. Right. It was on or off. Mm-hmm. And Star Grunt has a pretty sophisticated, you could say it's complicated because it's not easy to remember all the facets of it. Mm-hmm. But it's got an interesting intersection of force morale and what's the term it uses? It's force motivation.
Right.
motivation level.
Okay.
And so you could have, units that are really good units, but their motivation just isn't there. So their likelihood to do something really dangerous to themselves is a little less likely. Whereas you could have, basically untrained fanatics that'll do everything you tell them to do when you tell them to do it.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting system because it really focuses on the people, not on the equipment. Gotcha. It's not the type of game for people who really like to get down in the weeds about the difference between just to give it a, if you want to talk about the differences between an AK-47 and an M16, this isn't the game for you because it's just going to call it an automatic rifle.
Okay, yeah.
And be done with it.
Yeah.
Even worse if you're the type of person that's going to discuss the differences between an SMLE Mark IV and a Car 98K.
Yeah.
By all practical terms, they're the same rifle.
Okay.
But yeah, there are some minor differences, but there are distinctions without a difference. Their effect on the battlefield is equivalent. Yeah. And that's how Stargrunt looks at it.
Okay. Yeah.
And
they've got some nice miniatures been made for it as well, I'm noticing, because funnily enough, it's going back a couple of years now, they advertised in the magazine, and I've just stumbled across one of their old adverts. They're called GZG, are based in Colchester in Essex, right here in the United Kingdom. But there's some really nice looking kind of armoured people on planet surface with walkers type things, miniatures. Look really nice, actually. Very nice.
Yeah, all of my 15 mil sci-fi stuff is GZG.
All right.
All of it. And it's not like I don't like other stuff. It's just John's customer service is beyond reproach, and his ability to get stuff to the United States is legendary.
Gotcha.
If you go onto the Stargrunt and Full Thrust, if you go onto the Stargrunt and Full Thrust groups, I mean, it's pretty commonly known that John has a wormhole generator somewhere. Because he is able to get packages. The quickest turnaround I've had from GZG is 8 days.
Wow.
To the middle of the United States. I have gotten orders from folks in the United States in longer than that.
Yeah. And we see the complaints on TMP every day, don't we?
There's folks in the UK who talk about, well, I placed my order on Tuesday afternoon and it was on my doorstep on Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic.
It's just spectacular, and he runs neat sales every once in a while, and if pretty much as a standard deal, he's got a threshold in his mind where if you go over a certain amount, he'll just add free stuff. Doesn't even ask you what you want. He just, here's some free stuff. That's and and of course, I'm sure he takes it as a loss leader for future sales because the last big order I did, he included some basically little tracked gun drones.
All right.
And I had no intention of buying the little tracked gun drones, but my next order is probably going to have some little tracked gun drones in it.
It's clever stuff, isn't it? Oh yeah, that's brilliant. So Stargrunt is obviously, by the sound of things, something you definitely recommend, and I certainly, looking at the quality of the miniatures and stuff, I would say that looks definitely worth checking out at where is it? www.gzg.com. That must be one of the easiest web addresses to remember. gzg.com. Fantastic. Obviously, the other rules that I know you love, and you kind of already mentioned in passing, commands and colors. What is it about commands and colors that you love so much as a system? I mean, and we have in the past discussed the fact that it clearly does have its frustrations.
Yes.
At times because it's so card driven. So what is it about it as a system that kind of really floats your boat, Jay?
Two things. First thing is I can play a full game in about an hour.
Yep.
And feel like, or I can play a complete game in about an hour, and I feel like I've played a full miniatures battle game.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. The second thing is the mechanisms are devilishly simple, and I can teach the basic mechanisms to a complete neophyte, even a complete neophyte to gaming, in under 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And it is one of my ongoing projects is a large Commands and Colors fantasy game. And yes, I know, hold off your cards and letters telling me about battle lore. I'm fully aware of battle lore. Using basically a huge Commands and Colors game at a convention, epic style, with 4 players per side. So 8-player Commands and Colors, huge game, 28 mil figures, 6-inch hexes, singing and dancing, the whole Megillah, a 13-foot wide table, or 13-foot long table, 5 feet wide, just festooned with figures. That's kind of a dream of mine, because I like the idea of a big battle game, but I don't want to play big battle game rules.
Yeah, I'm with
because I don't want to have to do a 45-minute rule briefing just to get started.
Yeah, I agree. You might have noticed, Jay, earlier this year, in May, when I went to the Partisan show in Newark, and I posted a big album of photos on Flickr afterwards. And amongst those photos were some guys who were there doing almost exactly that, playing a huge Commands and Colors Napoleonics game. They were actually using 28mm miniatures, which, I mean, obviously individually those miniatures were lovely and they were beautifully painted. I kind of felt, if I'm honest, that they missed a trick, because I think if the miniatures had been a smaller scale, it would have looked much more like a real big battle. But of course, the flip side of that is also that the 28mm miniatures kind of simplify the look of the game, because obviously you've got far fewer miniatures per hex. I can't remember how many they could actually fit in a hex. It obviously wasn't many with 28. But yes, I mean, the idea of big games but with a simple rule set like Commands and Colors is very appealing. Also, Jay, obviously you've played both the standard Commands and Colors game and the epic version of the game. For those that don't know, essentially, what is the difference between those two versions of the game, other than it just being bigger?
Well, the basic game is one player versus another player, and you are the commander and you're the sub-commanders and wing commanders, to use the ancient or early modern term. Yeah. And in the epic game, you have you can have up to 4 players per side, and you've got an overall commander and then 3 wing commanders. And what's really interesting is the overall commander is the one who draws the command cards, right, and then issues them to his 3 subordinate commanders.
Oh, I see.
And then when the overall commander is speaking with the subordinate commanders, he or she can only speak to 1 subordinate commander per turn. So it's up to the subordinate commanders that aren't talked to interpret the issuing of that card to the best of their ability, and it becomes really fascinating how that plays out.
Oh, right. Yeah, that sounds great.
I've run Zama from Commands and Colors Epic Ancients, both in a convention and at my J3, Jay's July Jamboree. And in a convention setting, you let the overall commander fudge a little bit on his talking to the subordinate commanders, just simply because it is a convention setting.
Right.
But when it's just my friends, I'm pretty strict about that.
Gotcha.
And it really makes things interesting.
Oh, I bet.
Because you've got okay, he just gave me a card that says 2 units right. I'm on the right, and I've got a whole bunch of units on the right. So which ones is he hoping that I do? You know?
Oh, right, yeah.
And it's just so damn clever. And even with the Epic, I think when we did Epic Zama, we did it plays in about 2.5 hours.
Wow.
You know?
That's amazing.
And I think that might have, that probably doesn't count setup, because there's a lot of stuff you got to put out. Because you're looking at having, 30, 35 units on the table.
Yeah.
And it just works so well. And I love that a single roll does combat resolution. It does morale at the same time.
Yeah.
And it just works so damn well. And Richard has tweaked it depending upon the era that you're playing. Because I've got Battlecry, which is a Civil War version. I've got Commands and Colors Ancients, which is Ancients, obviously.
Yeah.
Napoleonics. Tricorn now.
Oh, that's the American War of Independence.
American War of Independence. Yeah. And I've got Red Alert on its way. I'm trying to think, is there another version that I've got that I'm forgetting?
Battle Lore, Battle Cry.
Well, I've got Battle Lore, yeah. Which is fantasy, high fantasy.
Yeah. And then Red Alert for the Sci-Fi. I think you've covered all your bases there, mate.
Yeah.
Oh,
and then,
was it Memoir 44 or something? World War II?
I don't have Memoir 44, which is World War II, and I don't have the Great War, which is World War I.
Yeah, that's PSC, of course.
Medieval is coming out soon.
All right.
So there's a sci-fi ground version called Abaddon, which I don't think was ever very popular.
I've never heard of that one.
Big stompy robots and infantry.
Oh, okay.
So that's 10 versions of the game.
Oh my goodness!
Supposedly, maybe an 11th.
I think you're a fan. I think you're a fan, mate.
Well, to be fair, there's 4 versions I don't have. So, or don't have yet. I should say.
Yes, always append that important word.
Yeah.
Yet.
When I was talking to Neil about Commands and Colors just for a little bit last time he was on. And, it was when I did the unboxing video. I did an unboxing video for Tricorn.
Right. And
went through what I have and what I don't have. And was saying, I'm not a completist by any means. It's not like I've got all the expansions. Yeah. I've got all but 2 of the expansions for Ancients. I've got 2 of the expansions for Napoleonics as well. So, to my credit, I don't have any of the expansions for Battle Lore, and being Fantasy Flight Games product, that's saying something, because they love their expansions.
Yeah.
But it's the ability to teach someone a game, or at least the basics of a game, in less than 15 minutes and get them up and playing and running is crucial, because a lot of the gaming that I've been doing recently has been either in a convention setting or in a store setting.
Right.
And, I try to if I'm in a store, I definitely make it a point to put it out so that anyone who wants to play can play. So we've had some success with that, playing What a Tanker at our FLGS in Springfield, Titan Games.
Yeah.
And we actually had someone take us up on that. Not the last time we played, but the time before. So, yeah, and it just works so well. And I've thought about, hey, maybe I'd like to do some other game system at a convention. No, not really. It just works so damn well.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's great. So, Commands and Colors, lots of love from you there. I noticed here, and we mentioned earlier, Rogue Trader, one of the interesting things here is you've mentioned that I should check out the 8-page spread on Hell's Reach about 40k Rogue Trader.
Yeah.
Say something about this.
Oh, man. In the back of the book, in the back of the original Rogue Trader book, there is an 8-page spread on a setting that they call Hell's Reach. And Hell's Reach is basically... It's on a planet. I forget the name of the planet, but it's on the edge of human space.
Right.
And near what they call the Eye of Terror, which is... The Eye of Terror is a space... There's an area in space which is dominated by warp storms. So they have difficulty getting to it. So, yeah, it's an Imperial planet, but the actual influence of the Imperial forces is minute.
Right.
Because Imperial commanders go in, impose their will for a short time, and then bug out when things look dicey for getting out, because no one wants to get stuck there.
So it's like the Badlands, basically.
Yeah, and there are orcs and Eldar and humans living on the same planet, and there are mining gangs, and it's kind of like an Old West setting.
Right.
Mad Max kind of, hard scrabble kind of existence, and you can't really call it post-apocalyptic because there probably was never an apocalypse to begin with. It was always a shithole.
Right.
And it's just a neat setting where you can pick and choose the elements of the 40K background that you want in your games. And I've actually expanded on that for my own sci-fi games for J3 by actually taking that concept of just something on the edge of space or on the edge of Imperial space that might not get as much scrutiny and just made it a huge space station.
Right.
And then
that sounds quite interesting because as you know, I mean, 40k by and large leaves me a bit cold. It's never really kind of floated my boat. So you're saying look around the kind of periphery of that universe and there's more interesting stuff going on, yeah?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I know it's a pretty nihilistic universe, to put it plainly. I mean, right in the first book, in a universe with untold billions dying every day and the various wars going on, you won't be missed. That's kind of a downer, isn't it? You've got all these threats, external and internal, and it's just kind of a downer. And then I guess you just look for the highlights where you can find them.
Too many skulls, mate. Too many skulls.
Oh, yes. I did.
Go on.
I here in the hotel last night in the hotel room, I shot an unboxing video of Kill Team. I bought Kill Team while I was on vacation, and my son wants to be in one of my videos. So of course, you can be in the video, and God love him. I was talking about, it's the Gothic, pseudo Gothic architecture of the terrain. And he said, what's Gothic? Well, Gothic is an architectural style favored in medieval Europe in the 13th to the 16th century. And he said, oh, okay. So there's skulls here and there's skulls there and there's skulls on your face. Well, yeah, actually. Straight from the mouths of babes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Leaving 40k behind, Bridget,
sure.
In your notes, you mentioned some book, I don't know about it, the Wargaming Compendium. Why'd you like that, mate?
It's just a little piece of tat,
Thanks.
Oh, no. I mean, of course, if you're listening to the podcast and you don't know what the Wargaming Compendium is, go ahead and set your podcast playing device down for a moment and go to the library and take a look at, look up Charles Grant and Donald Featherstone and look for those books and then imagine them with modern typesetting and modern layout and a modern perspective on the hobby. And that's what you get.
Well, bless you, mate.
And it's
my
not,
work is done.
Yeah, and it's just a really neat book. And seeing, getting it in the mail and having your buddy's name on the bottom of it was really cool. It was really neat to see, and it's a neat book. It's I still, I've had, gosh, it's been out 5 years now.
Yeah,
and I still refer back to it for various things. There was I was talking on a kind of a group chat thing, and they were asking, well, what the hell is a fusilier? Hold on a second.
Yay.
I'll reference the Wargaming Compendium and find out what a fusilier is. So, and thankfully, because of the Wargaming Compendium, I know what a fusilier is. And when it was brought up in my unit, because we were talking about radio call signs, and someone said, yeah, I had a unit commander who insisted that we were fusilier, and we were wondering what the hell a fusilier is. And apparently it's just some kind of infantryman. And I was actually able to step in and say, well, there's a little bit more to it than that.
Well, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
Instant promotion for you, Sergeant Arnold. Fantastic. Well, bless your heart for that little mention. Well, I'm blushing. We'll move on. Because he also mentioned here Trinity Battleground. Oh,
yes. Yeah, Trinity Battleground was a White Wolf Games, or White Wolf Publishing, the folks who did Vampire role-playing game.
Okay.
They had a science fiction setting called Eon Trinity, and they came out with a tabletop skirmish game called Trinity Battleground. And again, it was a box set with some plastic miniatures in it. A friend of mine, a gaming buddy from when I was at Fort Bragg, actually did the figure design. He designed all the figures and did quite a bit of the artwork in the book.
Oh, right.
And it's a neat little skirmish system where you've got individual figures. And each figure is a distinct character. They also had a system where, your heroes, your main characters are individual figures.
Yeah.
But then I think they might have taken a page from The Sword and the Flame and similar games.
Right.
Where you can have basically squads of, no-name jerks.
Right.
And I really like that system. I've developed, or I've modified it for various uses. I did I mentioned him earlier, John Isbrand, and I did an Old West modification for it.
Yeah.
It's just a really neat system. It didn't get a lot of press or a lot of hype when it came out, but it works, and it's a neat system. There's a lot of things to it that I like. It was one of the first tabletop games that I used that used kind of a dice pool mechanism.
Okay.
Where, whatever your stat is, that's how many dice you roll.
Yep.
And you're just looking for successes. Success in that game is 7 or more on a D10.
Right.
And then if you roll a 10, that counts as 2 successes.
Oh, okay.
So you're just looking for numbers of successes, and it's just there's some things that are kind of ungainly about it, but it was one of the first games that I recall having whoever did the layout of the book itself really did some heavy lifting, because it had artwork throughout. It's great. It's got really characterful, for lack of a better term, layout, because it's pretty standard these days where you've got illustrations along the edge of the page, and a picture on a page isn't just a picture. It's with a black border. It's got like a little frame around it to make it look like a computer printout or computer display or something like that. And this was what, 99 or 2000 when it came out.
Yeah.
So it's one of the first ones to do that. It's a really, I keep saying the same words over and over again. Very underloved.
All right.
I don't know where how the business things worked out, but it seems like there were a lot of box sets that came out in 98 to 2000 and then the companies that produced them just failed miserably afterwards.
Yeah.
Because that was one of them. Clan War, the company that made it was called AEG. They had a box set with metal miniatures. Clan War box set had metal miniatures in it. Target with the Warzone 2nd Edition box set. There was FASA. They had a sci-fi game called Vor, which had metal miniatures in it, and they went under shortly thereafter. They didn't fully go under, but they're on life support for some time, and they're making a comeback now. But
this is interesting because this is all looking at the kind of stuff that you've enjoyed gaming. A lot of it is kind of around the sort of small unit skirmishy end of things, and I noticed that you're saying that you would really like to design your own skirmish set of rules. So do you want to tell us something about that, Jay?
Yeah, I just like the idea of, there's a couple different things. I'm a big fan of Necromunda when it came out. I was a big fan of Mordheim when it came out, which is basically fantasy Necromunda. Small bands of individual characters. Your figure counts anywhere from 4 to a dozen. I just like. Obviously, I like skirmish games. I just picked up the Kill Team box set. There's something about being able to invest that type of love and care into just a small set of figures, which appeals to me. And as much as I hate to say it, but really, as big as my dreams are, realistically speaking, I don't have the time to devote to painting, multiple 24 figure units. For a big battle game.
Yeah, this is what has held you back on your imagination stuff, I know, hasn't it?
Yeah, and even with 6 mil, it's what a tanker. Okay, I can do a 15 mil tank. I can do one, or I'm actually working on 10, but I can do that. That's doable. Vehicles are another matter altogether, though. I mean, vehicles, you can bang out vehicles pretty quickly.
Unless your name is Simon Tonkis. Hi, Simon, because I know you're listening to this, who lavishes all kind of wonderful time and energy and micro kind of climate adjustment on them.
His stuff is beautiful. What Simon does with the What a Tanker stuff and with his 40K project is just gorgeous.
I know.
Just absolutely gorgeous.
I know. But let's get back to your skirmish.
Anyway, and there's, and part of it might be because that's the level. I'm a sergeant first class in the Illinois Army National Guard. That means I'm a platoon sergeant, so I'm thinking platoon level stuff. Or below. And that's just a really that's direct leadership for one thing. And maybe it's just because I have a better understanding of that level of leadership personally. That's where some of my interest lies. But, I like coming up with neat names. One of the cool things about working in a science fiction setting is you can come up with neat names. Like one of the characters who's actually going to be a jet bike pilot for something I'm working on. His name is Hilgu Geedy. I just like, coming up with neat names like that. And,
making stuff up.
And even for What a Tanker, the Lardies themselves come up with some pretty interesting names for their big men. So, one of my Panzer IV commanders is named Max von Zilberhammer. You can come up with stuff like that. You can invest some character into these people.
Absolutely.
Just leafing through the Kill Team book, they've really done a great job with introducing that type of mentality, because they've got lists of names that you can give to your characters.
Oh, right.
Just to give you an idea. So, they've got it as a random table if you want to randomize it, or you can just pick pick the name. So they've got different name ideas for all the different factions, and you can come up with a little bit of little bit of a background for him also.
Well, and, I love that kind of stuff. I mean, in fact, in the compendium, I spoke at some length about creating personalities for your commanders and that kind of stuff, because it makes the gaming much more personalized, doesn't it, and much more individualized.
Yeah. Well, it's a well-known fact that the first time a freshly painted unit hits the table, they're going to get destroyed.
Oh, absolutely.
So
all the more the chance of that if you've decided that they should be elite as well.
Oh, certainly. And if you can name the unit, even better, which actually I think segues nicely into one of your other points on the show notes. We were talking about memorable gaming moments.
Yeah.
I was at a recruits show. Gosh, this must have been 4 or 5 years ago now. And Ken Van Pelt, Ken is a guy that I gamed with when I was in high school.
Right.
And he actually recently retired art teacher.
Right.
And he does fantastic convention games. A lot of fun. He really invests a lot of time and lavishes effort on everything he's doing. There for a long time, he was doing all of his games with toy soldiers.
Oh, right.
And he would modify, roughly 54 millimeter toy soldiers, and he would modify them and paint them up.
Yeah.
But he did a 6 millimeter steampunk game using the gaslight rules.
Right.
And he used all of his infantry and cavalry were made out of cross-stitch mesh.
Oh, right.
And he would take the cross-stitch mesh and cut off the little sections.
Right.
And, an infantryman was basically 2 blocks tall, and it was just basically a T shape.
Right.
But then he'd, a little bit of a T shape, and he'd paint, it was set during the Civil War. So, you have the little top in blue, and then you've got this little stripe of flesh color, then another blue stripe, and a lighter blue stripe, and then you've got on the T section that comes out, you paint that black, and there's your Springfield muzzle loading rifle.
Well, be blowed.
And he scratch built all of the land cruisers and land battleships, whatever term you want to use for them.
Yeah. And
I had a stand of infantry that not only assaulted one of these land tanks, but they took the damn thing over.
Fantastic.
And so at the end, right then on the spot, he just had him based on, we call it mat board, what frame makers use to mat pictures with.
Yeah.
And so right on the spot, he said, hey, that's spectacular. We're going to give that unit some honors. Is there something you want to name them? I said, name them the 9th Illinois Volunteer Infantry. So, because that's, the unit that I deployed with, we trace our, my regiment, the 130th Infantry Regiment, we trace our lineage back to the 9th Illinois Volunteer Infantry.
Oh, fantastic.
The Blackhawks. So name them the 9th Illinois Volunteer Infantry, the Blackhawks. So he picked up the stand on the spot and wrote on Sharpie on the bottom, 9th Illinois Volunteer.
That's brilliant.
Blackhawks. So, yeah.
Fantastic stuff.
That was...
I was going to kind of segue on a bit here, kind of to asking me, okay, we talked about some of the games you like and miniatures and what have you. What about the situation with your kind of scenery and terrain, Jay? Tell us about that.
I just need to do it.
Yeah.
It's I enjoy making scenery. I've posted pictures of some of the space station. I am working on a space station project off and on, and I've been doing stuff with that, and I really enjoy doing it. And that's not the problem. The problem is figures, doing models. And the first time when it really hit me why I delay in doing figures is when I was looking at the Clan War figures.
Oh, okay.
And the Clan War figures are, even though they're coming up on 20 years old now, they're still some of the most beautiful figures I've ever seen. And I was just
intimidated, I suppose.
Intimidated is the word, indeed. It's like, I'm not going to do these justice. And I get it in my head that I'm not a good enough painter. And the thing is, not with that attitude.
Right.
You know, you're absolutely right with that attitude. You know, and you just have to put your head down and get after it. And and the thing is, I need to remind myself, you know what? If I don't like the paint job, I can strip it off.
Yeah.
And do it again. And I just need to get in that mindset. And I think one of the things that's going to hopefully help with some of that is maybe, you know, when I mentioned on Twitter that I picked up the Kill Team box, someone said, "Cool, are you going to do an unboxing video and the models and all that?" So, yeah, absolutely. Maybe I need to do that. And so, you know, you've heard it here first. Empty promise that's not going to get kept. I'll do some painting videos on the figures and the scenery, because they're gorgeous figures. You can't argue that GW does not make gorgeous figures.
Yes, absolutely.
They absolutely make gorgeous figures and great scenery. You may not appreciate the aesthetic, and hey, it's different strokes for different folks, but these are some cool stuff. And I love me some Gene Stealer Cult. They're one of the armies I played in 40K second edition.
Right.
And scenery is a little bit different. I think you can get away with being a bit slapdash at times with scenery, a little bit more than figures, because people tend to focus on the figures anyway, which seems to me a little bit backwards, because the tableau
absolutely.
and all of its connotations is what's important, not one figure.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that's constantly up for debate, isn't it? And of course, when you go to a top quality show, I mean, over here in the UK, like Partisan, for example, or Colours or something like that, and you see the amount of work that's been lavished on the terrain alone, as well as the figures. It was that last Partisan show where there was that incredible Stalingrad game, where kind of every blooming brick and bit of broken pipe had been given attention, and then the miniatures on top of it were also fabulously done. Interesting, though, isn't it? Because when you've got particularly in a period like World War II, you've got the miniatures that look realistic. Of course, they actually look quite drab. They look really dusty and drab, and they kind of merge into that kind of landscape, that kind of background. Whereas in a lot of kind of horse and musket era games, often, or periods previous to that, because commanders tended to look for wide open spaces in which to have a battle. So the terrain kind of literally goes into the background, where it's all the brightly coloured troops that kind of leap out at you. So it kind of, I've got more sort of, if you like, kind in my assessment of stuff over time. I kind of feel like it's perfectly legitimate for people to lavish their time and energy and expertise on whichever bit interests them the most, Yeah. And certainly for their own gaming, I think it's slightly different if people are putting on like a demo game at a large war game show where effectively it's supposed to be showcasing the hobby and saying this is kind of what you can achieve if you work really hard at it. That's a different kind of thing. But I think for our own gaming at home or down the club or whatever, really it's a hobby at the end of the day, and as you say, our time is precious, so it's absolutely legitimate to kind of spend your time enjoying doing the bit you like the most.
Absolutely. And that's the great thing about the hobby, as a hobby, is that there's so many facets to it. And I've said it time and again, there is literally something for everybody in the wargaming, in the broader wargaming hobby.
Yeah.
Whether that's the historical research or, writing rules or doing figures or scenery or, everything in between, and you can spend as much or as little time on whatever aspect you want. And for me, the actual playing of the game is the most important part. So yeah, there have been more than one time I've fielded unpainted figures. In fact, I've probably not probably I know I've played more games with unpainted figures than with painted.
Sure.
Because it's about playing the game for me, and I guess that's another thing that I like Commands and Colors about. Aside from you spend 2 hours doing some stickers, you're done.
Yeah. Well,
you're done.
2 hours is quite generous, I think, for some of the sets and expansions. But
I've been lucky between the 2 sets that I've actually personally stickered, because my Commands and Colors Ancient stuff, again, I got from Jake Rose for a hell of a steal.
Right.
And it was already stickered. So
wow.
That was no problem. Now the expansions weren't. So actually I've still got one of the expansions I haven't even stickered yet.
Oh, mate, let's not go there. That's another aspect of my gaming. I don't want to dwell on. But the other thing is, talking about this, how you dedicate your time and stuff, one of the other things that's obviously has come across as important to you is gaming with your own family is quite a big thing for you. So, obviously you game with your kids and your brother and stuff. So tell us a bit more about the importance of this, gaming with your family as well.
Oh, absolutely. And the kids, if I can get the kids interested in it, I'm all for it, which is why I wanted to have my son in my latest video, which, again, it's a family affair because my brother does my video editing for me. So
right.
It works out pretty nicely that way.
Yeah.
I recognize the value of the hobby for the educational benefits it provides, because there's art. There's math, there's science, there's reading, there's history. Yeah. If you want to take it that direction, there's music. If I could get my daughter's studying piano, and she's got other interests in musical instruments, and if I can get her, to learn how to play British Grenadiers on piano, that'd be great.
Fantastic. Yeah.
If I can get them interested in it, for one thing, I know they're gonna learn something, and then if they really get into it, and start buying their own stuff, they won't have money for drugs.
Touche. Now I agree, because obviously this is what you're saying. There's the kind of stuff I put on the blurb on the back of the Wargaming compendium, isn't it? Or in the fly sheet of the compendium. When people ask me, is it any good, this wargaming hobby? Because people don't really know what to say. But then yes, there is this list of the potential educational value for kids, and also just the number, even as an adult, or the different range of interests that our hobby encompasses. When I think about it, and what a typical month, say, in a typical month, I might be doing all kinds of things that are directly related to the hobby, like playing the game, learning about tactics, painting the miniatures, researching the uniforms for historical miniatures, doing the modeling stuff, conversions, making scenery, all that kind of stuff. Plus then, even now, those ancillary things, including, for example, precisely what we're doing now, making a podcast or making a video, as I've just released for my patrons in the last couple of days. I went and all because, in the compendium, I did that horse color chart that people found interesting, and I've had various questions about it. And a real horse woman saw it and said, "Oh, actually, yes, I could probably give you some more information that your readers might find useful." So I went and spent an afternoon at a stables filming all stuff about horses, which I have to tell you was absolutely fascinating. And, I do hope the patrons watch the fruits of a couple of days of labour putting that film together. But all these things, are just... Still, I think this is the thing, Jay, isn't it? That how long have I been doing the hobby? Since I was, 9 years old, which is now decades ago. And I'm still excited and interested by it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, we're, on the last leg of our vacation. We'll be home later tonight, but, take for today, for example, I mean, we're in Hopkinsville, Kentucky.
Right.
We're going to be zipping down to Fort Donelson,
right,
where U.S. Grant had his first big victory.
Oh, okay.
And we're going to check it out. That's also kind of a professional interest because I'm going to be taking my officer candidates on a staff ride to Fort Donelson in November.
Right.
So I'm kind of doing a leader's recon, to use a military term, of the site to make sure, I'm going to hit the visitor center and then do a driving tour real quick to get a lay of the land. Because I've been there before, but it's, 15, 16 years ago when I was there last. And then my wife's hobby, she's a quilter, and she makes gorgeous quilts.
Right.
And we'll be driving through Paducah, Kentucky, home of the National Quilting Museum.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah. So I'm a fan of quilts. They're comfy, and I love the work she does with them. And I like any type of museum. I like the opportunity just to learn something new I might not have known before. So. Yeah.
I mean, sorry, Jay. I was just going to say. It's interesting, though, of course, what you've just mentioned there. It's just dawned on me about the education stuff. And, of course, you're doing this staff ride for your guys and what have you. And, of course, this sort of brings in the subject, and a good one to probably wrap up the show with, which is the professional wargaming aspect of what you're now doing as well, where the validity of and crossover interest of our hobby, not just as a hobby for amateurs, but also, as a training tool for real professionals.
Absolutely. There's episode 44, my most recent episode, is on professional wargaming. I spoke with Mr. Shane Perkins, who is an instructional team leader at the U.S. Army's Command and General Staff School.
Right.
And he is in charge of, I think he said, 8 instructors and 64 students during a course.
Right.
And he uses wargaming at a couple of different levels throughout the school year, because the Command and General Staff School program is it's a 9 or 10 month program.
Right.
And throughout the year, he uses war games at different levels and different types to foster the type of decision making that commanders and staffs have to make during actual operations. And one of the things we talked about briefly was a particular product that CGSS or CGSC, Command and General Staff College, I guess this Command and General Staff College is within the Command and General Staff School, has developed a pencil and paper war game, and it's called Land Power.
Right.
And it's not necessarily a replacement for some of the computer moderated systems that the Army also uses, but as an adjunct to them.
Right.
And it's something I want to get into, not only because I'm interested in it, but because it's, my next step in my career.
Yeah.
After I get some platoon sergeant time is definitely, battalion or brigade staff.
Right.
And I need to know how these systems work so I can either run them as a participant or as, a proctor, for lack of a better term. I'm not sure what term they would use. A facilitator, maybe.
Umpire, yeah.
Yeah, umpire, facilitator, proctor, what have you.
Yeah.
And actually, it's funny you mentioned umpire because in the military, in the professional wargaming circles, some of the literature, they talk an awful lot about Patty Griffith.
Oh, right.
And his committee war games. And, of course, he used the term umpire for his committee war games.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely want to get down that road. I want to look at Kriegspiel a little bit more. I got the Kriegspiel 1824 from the Lardies.
Oh, good.
One of my fellow instructors was interested in doing it also, but he went and took command of an artillery battery, that jerk.
Right.
So just kidding. No, Chandler is a really good guy, and I was really looking forward to doing some exciting stuff with him. It's just our paths in the organization didn't cross soon enough,
right,
for us to do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it's definitely, if they say if you can do what you love for a living, you'll never work another day in your life, and that's
absolutely.
I love training soldiers.
Yeah.
And I love war games, and if I could get a job doing that, that would be so damn cool.
Oh yeah, and also, I mean, to an outsider, that seems surely that's completely legitimate. Because the interesting thing is, back in the day of the Wargaming Godfather Brigade, the Featherstones and Grants and the Peter Youngs and what have you. Back then, of course, if you look at officer training facilities like Sandhurst here in the UK, they did war games on sand tables and things, know, and I know that Paddy Griffiths described his involvement in some of those early on, and I've heard stories from others as well where there would be there's like those kind of operating theatres where they do or used to do autopsies. So you've got the bank seating around and the the thing down the bottom, and instead of the grisly sight of a dismembered corpse, you'd have a giant sand table with armies deployed, and they would do all kinds of tricks with the officers commanding the troops and being told to sit either closer or further away from the table according to their ability to communicate with what's actually going on the battlefield. So they would literally put a physical distance, and they weren't allowed to use binoculars, so they'd literally be squinting to try and see what was going on the table and that kind of stuff. I love that idea. Or where they're playing a game on the sand table, and because someone was careless when they were packing up the last game, suddenly a battalion of infantry would pop up out of the sand, which would get unearthed, that kind of stuff. Where did that? It's like in a football match, if someone throws an extra ball onto the pitch, it's like, which one's the real ball? So, I mean, but it's got a proud history. I also know that here in the UK, kind of wargaming as a training tool for officers sort of fell out of fashion. Shall we say wargaming the kind that you and I understand, as opposed to big multiple computer terminal things. And I'm pretty certain that over here in the UK, Rich Clark, Two-Fat Lardy's Rich Clark, has been involved with the British Army and certain senior officers in trying to kind of revive an interest in this, and I'm fairly certain he might have talked about it even on one of the Lardy Oddcast things. So I need to go back and check through that. So I think this is kind of interesting, and obviously it would be wonderful for you, Jay, wouldn't it, if you were able to say, now funnily enough, you could learn quite a lot, guys, from the Battle of Zama. Let's lay out my armies and have at it, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that you mentioned wargaming falling out of favor. I mean, the military decision-making process, which is a multi-step behemoth of it's an algorithm, for lack of a better term. One of the key steps is course of action analysis.
Yeah.
And one of the sub-steps to that is wargaming. And but it's just, okay, if we do this, what happens? And if we do that, what happens? If they do this, what happens? That sort of thing. But it's ingrained in our doctrinal DNA to do wargaming, but it's short-circuited at lower levels because of time constraints.
Of course.
But that's where you come up. They've got groups in the Pentagon, in sub-basements of sub-basements that do come up with operational plans, and militaries have been doing this for centuries, where they come up with what if the Russians invade through Canada? What are we going to do? And that's where they do some course of action analysis on a huge level, and they do actually war game that stuff out. And one of the things they're wanting to do with the land power system, and I hope to have one of the developers on in the future. I've got some feelers out to make that happen, because I really want to talk about that system in particular. And because it's a brigade, you're as a brigade commander in the game, you're giving orders, and individual companies are moving on the table. Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely something I want to take a look at. And you mentioned the operating theater recruits, where it's held is in a big gymnasium that has a mezzanine that goes around 3 sides.
All right.
And I would love to have a game that was on the floor, well, on a table that's on the main floor, but the commanders for the opposing sides are up on the mezzanine. Yeah, that would be great. And I've thought about different ways of passing commands, either through Twitter or something like Twitter. Well, Twitter would have been better when it was still 140 characters. Now they're 280. You can get a lot of information in there. Yeah. But it would certainly beat having runners, because let's face it, the guys that are going to want to play that are not going to be real happy about running up and down stairs 30 times in an hour.
Combine PT with command. Fantastic.
Maybe we'll get some tennis balls and cut slits in tennis balls and throw the commands back and forth like that.
Brilliant. Anyway, Jay, I think we're coming up for, crikey, nearly 2 hours chatting, mate. So I kind of need to draw this to a conclusion. So just to kind of sum up, mate. I mean, obviously, you've been a wargamer for a long time. You've got wide and varied interests. You're a regular podcaster, and you're a guest on other podcasts. And you're doing your own thing, trying to put together your own skirmish rules and stuff. So you've carved a niche for you in this kind of very broad church eclectic hobby. Overall, Jay, I mean, it's a simple question. What is it that, if you had to summarize to someone else, what is it that wargaming does for you? And you mentioned some of the skill sets involved in that kind of stuff. What is it for you that is kind of the thing that, really floats your boat about this hobby, mate?
Well, it's looking holistically. It's intellectual. There's a research aspect to it. There's a just sitting and pondering thing, about it aspect to it, because, I can sit and I was doing when I was driving an hour and a half one way for work back when I was working in Springfield. I think a lot about war games. Yeah. And, there's an intellectual aspect to it. There's an artistic aspect to it. Sometimes there's a concept called flow for creative types. Oh yeah. Where you get in the groove and to the point where you're not even thinking about the process that you're going through. You're not thinking about the steps that you're taking, and you are just simply creating. Yeah. Actually, there's a really. Are you familiar with the Rubber Bandits?
The Rubber Bandits? No.
Yeah. The Rubber Bandits is an Irish comedy music group, for lack of a better term, and one of their members goes by the name Blind Boy Boat Club. And anyway, he's got a podcast called the Blind Boy Podcast, and one of his first episodes he talks about flow. Right. And it's a weekly podcast, and he talks about when he was writing his book, because he's got a book of short stories out. Okay. And he talks about when he was writing his book, he was in a state of flow for about 90% of its writing. Yeah. Because he just sat down, started typing, and out it came. Yeah, sure. And working on scenery, working on figures, when I do work on figures, it's one of the few times I experience flow. And and this is going to sound odd, but as a barber, I've experienced it a couple times where I'm just cutting and I'm not thinking about the haircut. And then I realize, oh crap, I'm about 3/4 of the way with this haircut. And hey, this actually looks halfway decent. And if you can experience flow, that's a great day, because you're just so into the process that you're not even thinking about it, and it's just stuff is happening. Yeah. And there is some definite psychological benefit to that. I know that there's been some great work with model making and whatnot for those who suffer from PTSD. Yeah. For some military types. The Combat Stress is doing great stuff with that in the UK. Yeah, and there's a group that's on Twitter. Is it Models for Heroes or something of that kind? It's called Models for Veterans. Yeah, you can find them on Twitter. I'm not going to say that. Well, I guess it does help me in one way, in a couple different ways. Personally, also, it's it's just a good time. It certainly beats going to a bar. Yeah. Yeah. It certainly beats going to a bar. It certainly, in my opinion, it beats sitting down and just watching baseball or football or hockey. And there's nothing wrong with that if you enjoy that. I enjoy watching a sporting event every once in a while, but and far be it for me to criticize anyone for their hobby. I mean, the big hobbies where I live are hunting, fishing, and demolition derby. Right. And I'm not interested in those things, so I do what interests me, and there's a few guys around, not many, but there are a few guys around that might be interested. But actually, there's a little bit of there's a 40K group in my town, so with Kill Team, maybe I'll interact with them a little bit more, because some of those guys are doing Kill Team. Yeah, so like me, it's basically your love of the hobby is based on the fact that it's so fulfilling in so many different ways. Yeah, and it's not just one thing. It's I can go, and I guess having done it for so long, I can go back and revisit projects that I started 20 years ago. Oh, tell me about it. Yeah. Yeah. Open that box. Oh man, I thought I'd finished painting those. Oh right, okay. And then the decision is either to quietly close the box again, or, as I've done recently, go, yeah, do you know what? Why not? Let's haul them out and give them another try. One of my most fulfilling moments of gaming last year, I got together with another Old Hammer, or actually a couple of Old Hammer adherents, last September. And we played the Battle of the Farm scenario from the back of the Rogue Trader book. Yeah. And my buddy brought the orcs, and I brought Space Marines. And then I realized, oh crap, I don't have any Space Marines painted. So after 29 years of having some of the original plastic beaky Space Marines, I finally finished them, based, decals, the whole deal. Wow. And so fantastic. And I bet they got killed really quickly, didn't they? Not real quickly, but they jumped the jinx then. Yeah, well, Pedro Cantor, the commander of the Crimson Fists chapter, did get himself killed. But, all right. Cool. But I love this hobby, and hopefully that comes through in my podcast and blog posts and Twitter feed and all that. And I love the hobby, and I certainly appreciate the role you play in it. As the dean of the hobby, I certainly bless you. Say that often enough, people will believe it. The trouble is, it's an unpaid post, Jay. Well, just think of all the accolades you get. No. I want one of those Legion of Honor things now. That's like Rich Clark's got one. I want one. Oh. Well, hey, you know what? I've had. How funny. Let's see who all. Okay, so how Richard got it this year. The Legion of Honor from the Historical Miniatures Gaming Society. Yeah. In the U.S. Richard received one. Richard Clark. Yeah. Howard Whitehouse received one this year. Yeah. Michael and Alan Perry and Richard Borg. So I figure out of this year's class, I've got 40% as guests. 40% of the current class as guests on my podcast. So wow. Also, that's a huge British contingent
isn't it?
Oh yeah,
that's
80%. Yeah,
yeah.
Well, Howard's pretty much an American now.
Yeah, he is more or less, but yeah. Anyway. On that note, Jay, thank you so much. It's very kind of you to lavish me with so much praise. But, mate, you have, as I said at the top of the show, you've carved yourself a tremendous niche in the niche, and you've immediately got yourself a lot of respect from a lot of people. Great podcast, great contribution to the hobby yourself. It's been so great to have you on the show again, and obviously I think we're going to be talking again at some point, probably before too long, because we ended up skipping through some of the show notes because I realized this could quite easily have turned into a 3-hour podcast rather than what it's going to be, which is roughly a 2-hour podcast.
Well, if you insist.
So it's been really great having you on, Jay. Thank you so much, mate. And I'm sure that the listeners would have enjoyed listening to you.
Well, I hope so. And, if they don't enjoy listening to me, well, I guess they can press stop.
All right, mate. Thanks so much for coming on board, and enjoy the rest of your holiday.
Oh, thank you. Absolutely.
All right. Cheers, mate.